but I'm really excited because we have a really special guest today to talk politics. He is the special guest of the Mark Thompson Show today, the host of the premier political television show in California. It's called The Issue Is. So you've seen him traveling with and in interviews with Governor Gavin Newsom and other key California and national political figures throughout the past year as well. I know Mark Thompson is a massive fan of his work. Please welcome to the show, Elex Michaelson. Yay!
Hi, Kim. Good to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Look at you. I'm loving the background. And what's the star? Is that a star of the Hollywood Walk of Fame behind you? What do we have?
It is. I'm not on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but I've hosted several events for them. So the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, who puts on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, sent me a commemorative star with my name on it. But it is an official commemorative star from the people who do it, not just when you buy at the gift store.
Very cool. Well, let's talk some politics, because I saw this story and I thought, this is my first one. I have to bring this up. So we've had this dueling war of words between former President Trump and the Jack Smith, the special counsel, where he says, first Trump says, you know what? You don't really need to rush on my account. And then Jack Smith says, yes, there's absolutely a reason to rush this Trump case. And the question of, does he have presidential immunity when it comes to these election interference cases? And so, I mean, it remains to be seen. I tend to think the Supreme Court will go with what Donald Trump wants, just because of, I'm jaded after the Roe v. Wade decision, but maybe they will make a fast decision on this.
Have you seen the breaking news in the last 10 minutes?
Well, tell me, because I've been on the air. I haven't.
Okay. So your gut was correct. The Supreme Court has decided not to do a rush decision, which essentially means they're going to put it up to the federal court first. They didn't make a decision, though, one way or another. They didn't say that Jack Smith was right or wrong. They just said that they were not going to make a decision for now. And so that leads to a longer runway for a potential trial. Jack Smith basically saying, let's cut to the chase. Let's go right to the deciders. Why jump through all these hoops?
Right.
Let's get to it. And they said, no, got to jump through the hoops. So there will not be a ruling, certainly in the next few days, when it comes to Jack Smith and immunity from the Supreme Court.
And that seems to play into what Donald Trump wants, which is delay, delay, delay. And that's how he kind of horns into these cases, and they drag on forever. And now we have a case that could potentially go past the election.
Right. And some would argue that maybe that was the reason that he ran in the first place, to deal with some of these legal troubles. Of course, the Georgia case, he could not pardon himself because that's a state case. But this federal case, he probably could. So you could have a scenario if he won the presidency. One of the first things he would do would be to pardon himself in terms of this case, and potentially pardon other people associated with these federal cases, and never be held accountable. So it's yet another thing that raises the stakes for 2024, and yet another thing that raises the potential for real polarization at a level in this country we perhaps haven't seen since the Civil War. Just, the concept of on any of these cases, the idea that Donald Trump could be behind bars on election day in November as the Republican nominee for president, and then potentially win the presidency while being incarcerated, is such a crazy concept if you think about it, but also not that far off a possibility based off of what's happening.
I saw an article yesterday quoting Fani Willis, who's, of course, the prosecutor in Georgia. And she said, we're not going to go lightly on him. If he's convicted here, his penalty will be as severe as it would be for anybody else. So it just made me think of it when you talk about possibly having a former president sitting behind bars. I think I've heard so many people say that's not a real possibility. He may face consequences, but they won't put him in jail.
She's certainly hinting that she would try to, because that's what they're potentially trying to do with other people. And it is interesting, especially in that Georgia case, that you are seeing all the people in Trump's orbit be held accountable. You've seen the folks who went to the Capitol on January 6th on his behalf be held accountable. But we have not seen Donald Trump be held accountable. In fact, we've seen the opposite. We've seen his poll numbers rise because of all of these criminal charges against him. We've seen the Republican base rally to support him. We've seen it help him when it comes to fundraising. Could there finally be a moment for this man who has lived so much of his life on the public stage, who literally was a reality show star, where reality was sometimes skewed and made up in the producing of a TV show, finally face real consequences or not?
It's the craziest thing. And the more I see him with this now 44% over Nikki Haley's, I think she's, way down in the 20%, and she's rising, but still it's the wildest thing that he has such a lead in this race. Like, the baggage that he carries just doesn't matter to people.
Although then there are other reports even today. There was a poll that came out last night that showed he only had a 4-point lead over Nikki Haley in New Hampshire. I mean, I think the big question, and you never know which poll to look at or the rest of it. But there were also a report overnight that Ron DeSantis's super PAC, Never Back Down, is backing down.
They're pulling money. They're not running the TV ad.
And New Hampshire. So, it is not crazy as a concept that if Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie, say, dropped out and backed Nikki Haley, that Nikki Haley would have a shot at winning the Republican nomination. I mean, if you combine the support of the Never Trumpers into one person, which didn't happen in 2016, remember, because too many people stayed in it, there is a chance for him not to be the nominee. Now, that for Democrats is potentially a really good thing because they think he's a threat to the country.
Right.
But if Nikki Haley also has a much higher chance of beating Joe Biden in a general election and is probably would be a real favorite if she became the nominee.
I love that you said that, because I was just going to ask you, what's better for Democrats in this situation? On one hand, I mean, people that feel that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, any step he takes closer to the presidency is not something you want to see. So that he could be knocked out before a primary election, to people that want to preserve democracy, is a win. But again, who are Democrats more likely to beat? I don't know.
Although the question is, do you want to take that risk?
Right.
And that a lot of people feel that Nikki Haley, although they disagree with her on taxation and disagree with her on women's rights, or they disagree with her on who she would appoint to the Supreme Court, or various things, they don't see her as somebody who could potentially end the country as an autocrat and suspend the Constitution. And so, maybe big picture, that's more important.
Agree. But if by chance Trump does make his way back into the White House, we could have a President Trump and a Vice President Trump. What? Laura Trump is admitting that she will happily be her father-in-law's vice president. She said the only drawback would be that I have to move to Washington, D.C. Oh, what a bummer for you. Is that realistic? He's not considering that. I mean, I know he's all in the family, but really?
I don't think that that's realistic, somebody that he's really considering. I think if he was going to give it to somebody in his family, I don't think it would be the wife of Eric either. It's hard to imagine the political upside of doing that. I mean, Donald Trump is a lot of things, but he's not stupid when it comes to politics, and his instincts in terms of where Republican-based voters are is pretty strong. He has a feel in terms of looking at ratings and looking at polls, and in a way that's almost like a savant. And I don't think that he would think that that is a risk worth taking. I think there's a lot of negative to that. And I think he wants to win. If he's going to do this, he wants to pick somebody that is going to help him. So I don't subscribe to the theory that he would pick Carrie Lake or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or somebody that he knows would alienate the middle of the country and not particularly help him that much. I think he wants to pick somebody who would help balance the ticket a little bit. Like Mike Pence is not somebody you would think of, obviously, as somebody who, necessarily jives with Donald Trump, but he knew that he needed to bring the evangelicals home. So he made a strategic decision and picked somebody who he wasn't that close with at the time. Certainly didn't leave being all that close to it.
No,
But
guess that relationship's over.
right, but I think he made a decision at the time that helped him at the time, and I would suspect if he was the nominee, somebody like Kristi Noem out of South Carolina,
Yeah.
or even Sarah Huckabee Sanders, or somebody, I would imagine probably a woman who's younger, who is very loyal to him and is going to follow the talking points, is who I would put money on as the Trump VP.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's get to this actor, John Schneider.
Right.
You might remember him from the Dukes of Hazzard, sliding over the car, running from the law. He apparently may now be remembered for something else, which is being one of these.
Matt Singer?
No, he was on the Masked. Yeah, he was on the Masked Singer. Apparently, in his spare time, he's a troll on the internet. Is what's happening, is going on. He had this social media post, which has now been deleted, but he said some pretty ugly things. It looks like he's a Trumper to the nth Trump degree. He said, and he's writing to President Biden, "Mr. President," he writes, "I believe you are guilty of treason and should be publicly hung." He said, "Your son too. Your response? Question mark. Sincerely, John Schneider." So this comment was a reply to a post from Biden, which said Donald Trump, who is facing more than 90 criminal charges, poses many threats to our country. He is also now, because of what he wrote on the internet, under investigation by the Secret Service for threatening the president. Wow.
So we put him in the undecided camp? Yeah, I mean, it's been quite a week. First off, they took the mask off, and we saw him on The Masked Singer this week, and now this news, which is the first time that I think anybody's been talking about John Schneider in quite a while.
Exactly.
So he is making headlines for very different reasons across the country. I mean, I don't think anybody would seriously think he's trying to hang the president. Maybe, I doubt that. But it does. I think although you can look at this kind of as a joke, it illustrates the deeper point about what's happening in this country, which is this deep polarization and echo chamber universe that we live in, where people are getting such different information from different information sources, and they see the world entirely differently. Yeah. There is a right-wing ecosystem that sees Joe Biden as the most corrupt president in the history of the United States, who thinks that he's part of some criminal enterprise with his son Hunter, and that it's part of like a cabal of the Uniparty trying to bring everything down. And so they need to try to stop that as part of their mission. And then, of course, on the left wing, there's people that think that Donald Trump is a criminal, corrupt, the worst president in history, and anything needs to be done to stop it. And you have both of those universes existing at the same time without a lot of emphasis or, frankly, incentive for the middle to prosper based off of the way that social media is set up right now. And that's a really dangerous reality as we head into 2024. At the end of this, somebody's got to win. And traditionally, presidents have at least pretended to be interested in bringing the other side along and being the president for the whole country. That is something that Joe Biden talks about a lot. But Donald Trump was the first president in history that didn't really even pretend that he was trying to help the other side. In fact, sometimes took joy in not helping the other side when it comes to blue states and helping them along. And so that is really a concerning thing. As we move into a political year, which is probably going to be one of the ugliest campaigns we've ever seen.
It probably is, because we were divided before, and things have only gotten more and more heated. So this is going to be, I think this is going to be really ugly. But we're still seeing things that happened in 2020 kind of filter through now. And so let's bring up this phone call, because we've all heard the Georgia phone call where he just wants to find enough votes. Now we have this phone call.
Votes.
Yeah, 11,700.
Whatever, to the Secretary of State of Georgia, which he's under
Brad
investigation.
Raffensperger. That's right. But now we have another phone call that we haven't heard the audio from, but reporters have heard it from Detroit, and also CNN had noted it previously. This is a call where Trump pressures Michigan canvassers not to certify the 2020 election. And it's a recorded phone call. I'm sure that eventually that'll be, put out to the public, and we'll hear that as well. Yeah. But this is phone recordings received and reviewed by the Detroit press that show Trump personally pressuring two of the canvassers, the two Republican members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, not to sign the certification for the 2020 presidential election. And not only is Trump on this tape, but also Ronna McDaniel is on this tape as well. Right. And she's saying, yes, we'll get you lawyers if you don't vote, what have you. How damning do you think this is? And does this enter as evidence in the case in Washington, D.C., the election interference case? Or is this another case that we could see another one brought in the state of Michigan?
Unclear in terms of the second part of your question on whether it will be a separate case in Michigan. All the reporting we've seen so far is that this is part of the evidence that Jack Smith is using in his case. It's part of the reason, to get back to the beginning of our conversation, why he thought it was so important to rush this thing along and get this trial going before Donald Trump could essentially squash it if he got control of the Justice Department as president again. And yes, the fact that this call in coordination with the Georgia call, it shows a pattern, right? And that sort of thing can be important when you're trying to show a criminal case, that the Georgia thing was not a one-off, that there was a strategic thing here. And the fact that it is Trump himself on the phone call and not somebody else, not just one of his underlings, will also show that he was a part potentially of the scheme, which is what the argument will be. Trump may try to plead ignorance, like, these are my lawyers, I don't know what they were doing, I don't know anything about this. But the fact that he is there and says it, just like in the Mar-a-Lago case, when he has the documents that he's showing off that he wasn't supposed to have, the fact that in that recording he mentions the fact that he's not really supposed to have them shows a sort of consciousness and awareness of what's going on. He can't just plead like, I don't know what I'm doing, which is kind of what he would often do, even though he was the president of the United States. So I do think that evidence is significant. And I think it's also a reminder that there's probably a lot more evidence that Jack Smith has that we haven't seen yet. I mean, that indictment was pretty damning for anybody that read it. Both the Mar-a-Lago indictment and the January 6th indictment were pretty chock full of evidence, but he didn't have to put all the evidence in there. And if this thing does indeed go to a trial, there could be a lot more surprises ahead.
Do you have time for me to ask you a couple Governor Gavin Newsom questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. First of all, I know you've traveled a lot with, I call him GovGav. You've traveled a lot with him. And I wonder if there have been a lot of people saying, well, look what he's doing with the debate of DeSantis, and look what he's going over to China and Israel and all these places. He's running for president. And he says, no, I'm not. No, I'm not running. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, he's not running for president right now. That's clear. I don't know of any world where he challenges Joe Biden as the presidential nominee. So as long as Joe Biden stays the presidential nominee, I think Governor Newsom will continue to do what he's been doing, which is to try to be one of his most visible surrogates.
Sure.
He insists that he's never thought of ever in his entire life ever being president ever. Which I don't think
I don't buy it.
Why? So if you disagree with that premise, he certainly, I think, would be ready to run for president at a moment's notice. He's got a super PAC that he supports, that he's traveled around the country. He's in touch with donors. I mean, he's got a campaign apparatus. He's got an infrastructure in place where if tomorrow it was, Joe Biden dropped out and said, everybody have at it, I'm not going to endorse Kamala Harris, everybody's got a free run at this thing, I think he would have an opportunity to do that. Although we're starting to get late when it comes to some of the filing deadlines, and logistically that would be very hard to do at this point. But that is a possibility. And then, of course, he's potentially setting himself up for 2028, which we don't know what that would look like. And I think he has been trying to and been pretty good at making himself one of the top Democrats you think of in the country as a sort of heir apparent to Joe Biden. But there's a lot of Democrats that would like to see themselves that way, not to mention the person who is, next in line for the presidency, the vice president of the United States, who Gavin Newsom has known for 30 years and
Your buddies, yeah.
has a lot of the same campaign consultants and has had a close relationship with for a long time, not to mention other governors around the country, like Gretchen Whitmer, who has her own super PAC and has been doing her own travels around the country, and rising stars like Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania and Wes Moore of Maryland and Andy Beshear in Kentucky, who could make a strong argument why he would be the most electable person coming from a red state like that, not to mention an entire Senate full of people who all see themselves as the next president of the United States, not to mention the cabinet members that all see themselves as president. So everybody thinks, and especially on the right, you keep hearing in right-wing media, or I see it in my social media all the time, that Gavin Newsom, they are going to install him as president. I still don't know who they is. That's not really how it works. And even if Gavin Newsom becomes a candidate, it's not a for sure thing at all that he would become the nominee. It would be a tough slog, but he would have a good chance.
Because we like him in California, but how he plays in the rest of the country, I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And traditionally, California Democrats have not been successful around the country. You look at Jerry Brown, you look at his father, Pat Brown, and other people who have tried to do it, or Kamala Harris, who couldn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses when she was running for president. Republicans, on the other hand, in California have been more successful, with Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon reaching the White House, but that was a very different time and a very different political universe.
You mentioned the Senate. So let's talk about the Senate race, because I'm a little surprised to see a Republican rising in the polls to challenge what seems to be a race with Adam Schiff, right? So we have a new poll. It's I think it's a Politico poll. And they're putting now Adam Schiff at the top. I think they said 28% he had and the other, everyone else is in the teens, but the next highest vote getter was Steve Garvey. And so that's a bit of a surprise. What do you think about the Senate race and what's happening with that?
I don't see it as that much of a surprise, because just to give people context of all this that may not live in California, you've got Adam Schiff, who is a huge name in national politics, running also against Katie Porter, who's a big name in national politics with her whiteboard, and Barbara Lee, who has been very famous over the years as a civil rights crusader and also being a strong anti-war voice in Congress, and Steve Garvey, who played for the Dodgers and the Padres, won the World Series and was an all-star and very, very famous back in the 70s and 80s and hasn't been as famous since. And they're all running against each other with a few other people in the race as well. In California, we have a system where the top two finishers advance, regardless of party. So it could be Democrat versus Democrat. It could be Democrat versus Republican, or independent versus Republican. However it goes, that's who's going to advance. So the big question for our March 5th primary, where voting starts in February when people mail out the ballots, is who's going to be the top two? You think of California as a Democratic state because it is. We haven't had a Republican win a statewide election since Arnold Schwarzenegger did back in 2006. That being said, there's still a lot of Republicans in this state. In fact, more Republicans than any state in the country, because of course we have more people than anywhere else in the country. So there's still a good 35, or so, 35, 40% of the state that is Republican. And if all the Republicans coalesce behind one person and the Democrats split among Schiff and Porter and Lee, and there's Christina Pascucci, a journalist that's running, or other people that split it up, it is not inconceivable that Steve Garvey finishes in the top two and then is in a race with Schiff, which basically, from a math perspective, would mean that Schiff has won on March 5th, and there'd be a very uncompetitive, most likely, race in the fall, although you never want to make predictions, and there's a reason people do these elections. If it ends up being Schiff versus Porter, you could see an extremely expensive, a very competitive intra-party fight, which may or may not help Democrats. I think there's two ways to look at it. In one hand, it means Republicans aren't showing up as much. That may help in some of the House races because Republicans don't have as much reason to vote. Or you could see it as hurting Democrats because so much money is going to be donated to Schiff and Porter when you're going to get a Democratic seat there anyways. That's money that could potentially go to some of those competitive House seats around the country, around the state, including Orange County, which may determine whether Democrats or Republicans control the House.
Last question I had for you was this um, effort by Newsom. Well, not an effort, he did block this effort to criminalize behavior at school board meetings. And we were talking earlier with John Schneider, not with John Schneider, but you and I were talking about John Schneider.
An interesting booking if you could get him.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I want him anymore. But talking about how people are behaving, and at all kinds of meetings around the country, whether it's city council meetings or school board meetings like this, people are getting nasty. And so Governor Newsom saying creating a new crime for people misbehaving at school board meetings is not necessary. And I don't know if that's if how I feel about that, because we're having a big problem right now. There, in some cases, cities or school boards are having to take the ability for people to appear online away completely, even though it increased accessibility, it increased ugliness. So
it's a tough thing, and I think
yeah.
as people get nastier, it's going to become an interesting and important discussion. This
Mhm.
freedom of speech versus harassment, and it is a fine line. I think there. If you look at things that Newsom does through the prism of headlines that could be used against him in a presidential campaign, the slogan Newsom signs a bill that takes away the rights of parents to speak out might not be a great headline for him. So
Mhm.
maybe it was helpful for him to say no to some of the things that the Democratic Party does. Who knows? But I think that question, regardless of this bill, will persist
Right.
as people seem to have gone past the sort of decorum that used to be in place. Not that it always was in place when you think of the 60s and all the things people have done for protesting over the
Yeah.
years. But it has gotten nastier and gotten personal and scary.
Yeah.
This idea of protesting at people's houses, at doxing them, putting out their addresses,
Mhm.
and at a time when we have 300 plus million guns in this country, when we talked about those things about polarization and people feeling like the system is against them,
Yeah.
it is not impossible to think that somebody is going to get killed because of this, and that may prompt a rethinking of what we're doing. It's too bad we can't have a more nuanced conversation about that before that happens.
Yeah. Elex Michaelson, host of The Issue Is, that's on most Fox networks, right?
Not only Fox, we're in every affiliate, or every market in
Mhm.
California. Some of them Fox, some of them CBS, some of them
Okay.
ABC, depending on where you are. So if you go to the issueisshow.com and where to watch, you can see where in your community you can see it. You can also watch the show there, or
Yeah.
watch it at youtube.com/Elex Michaelson as well. If you don't live in California, we
Yeah.
post there every week, and we have a podcast called The Issue Is, where you can listen to the show as well.
Awesome. I'm going to check it out. And what a total pleasure to meet you. I hope you'll come back on the show.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Happy New Year, and please give my
Yeah.
best to Mark. I
I
guess we
will do
should
that.
give him a cheers for whatever he's drinking right
He's really jealous that I got to interview you first. So, woohoo. Thank you. Happy holidays to you too. And thanks for being here. Bye, Alex.
now.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.